Get goats into a gated community, you crazy person, Karen yelled, holding her clipboard as if it were a sword, her face flushed and nostrils flaring. She stood in front of my truck, attempting to physically block my way with her body. I leaned out the window, raised an eyebrow, and said in a calm voice, "Ma'am, you're literally standing in the middle of a county road." She pointed her finger at the trailer behind me, the two goats within, causing her next breakdown. "I'm calling the police. This is illegal farming. You're not even registered with our HOA, she shouted. For an instant, I almost pitied her. Almost, because the second she dialed and began ranting to 911 about some outlaw farmer running some rogue livestock operation in her beloved neighborhood, she didn't know the one person she'd end up regretting crossing was me, the county sheriff. The land I'd moved to wasn't much, just 5 acres on the outskirts of Spring Ridge, left to me by my grandfather. It was somewhat overgrown, a little feral, but cherished. I spent weekends repairing the old barn, planting raised beds, and introducing a few chickens and goats to start a little homestead. Technically speaking, my house lay outside of the HOA boundaries, but yes, it did border their spick-and-span suburban citadel. That never stopped Karen from treating me as if I posed some threat to the sanctity of her utopia. It began with the small thing, sneering glances when I drove by, calls to the county about my rustic wood fence, and the pièce de résistance, a typed letter stuck in my mailbox that said, "HOAs maintain property values, stop being the exception." Signed, of course, by a concerned neighbor. I didn't take the bait. I dealt with louder and dumber in uniform. Karen was stationary, not flames, until the day she crossed the line. I was mucking out the goats' water buckets when I heard my gate groan and the unmistakable tap of heels on gravel. Karen burst onto my land like she was at the head of a tactical raid, phone clutched in her hand, yelling accusation. "This is all illegal. Agricultural fraud, zoning violation, goat rabies, environmental hazards." Dripping wet and gripping the hose, I stood by and watched her stumble over a feed bucket and almost faceplant into a stack of hay. She steadied herself at the last moment, then spun around to jab her finger in my direction as if I was some sort of rural crime lord. She documented the whole thing, narrating it like a true crime documentary. "Here we have an unauthorized farm operation, potentially unlicensed animal. The odor alone is a threat to peace in the neighborhood." I reminded her that she was trespassing. Her reply, "You don't get to speak law to me. I'm on the HOA enforcement board." And then she went for it, threatening to call the cops to shut me down. I cocked my head and said, "Go on." 10 minutes passed, and a county deputy arrived. Young fellow, new out of the academy. He hadn't seen me yet in street clothes. Observing me in muddy boots and a dusty shirt, he turned to Karen, obviously thinking she was in the right. "Ma'am, what's the problem?" Karen began a melodramatic speech. Code violation, goat smells, fictional transgression. My deputy turned to me, requested identification. I wasn't chatty, just uttered, "Let me show you something." I took him out to the barn, pushed back an old canvas tarp, and showed him my tagged patrol car. Next to it, on the wall, my active sheriff's badge, framed in a plaque autographed by the mayor. His complexion went white. Karen poked in behind us, still rolling, until she spotted the badge. Her phone almost slipped from her grasp. "Wait, you're the sheriff?" she stuttered. I nodded. "County Sheriff Luke Nash. Nice to see you again, ma'am. Just so you're aware, you've now made a false report, trespassed on county land, and possibly put livestock in danger." I smiled. "But hey, I'm not working today." Karen muttered something about being misinformed, attempting to slither backward. The deputy's expression read like he wished he'd gone the other way that morning. I gave her a warning. She slunk off my property like a wet cat, ego properly wrung out. The deputy apologized, no doubt made a mental note to never take a suburban busybody at face value again. I could have had her charged, but something told me Karen was hardly done. The next morning, I woke up to a stack of papers jammed into my mailbox. Violation notices, all phony, all printed on mock HOA letterhead. One said I was operating a commercial goat breeding operation. Another said my sunflowers were a pollen nuisance. One even said I had rooster weapons hidden somewhere in my yard, whatever that was. Karen wasn't just irritated anymore. She'd gone official, declared war. And the best part, she still didn't get the rules. She was convinced she was working with a redneck farmer and a pair of goats. But what she was going to learn, slowly and painfully, was that I don't just know the law. I am the law. I didn't come down on her immediately. I made her wait, sat in at town meetings in uniform, watched her squirm in her seat, eyes darting anywhere but me. I watched her calling from the parking lot, cradling manila folders like they were state secrets. She'd begun playing a game she had no idea how to play. But word started going around that Karen was planning to bring the entire HOA board to my property, armed with so-called evidence of agricultural misconduct. I couldn't help but chuckle when I heard she had no clue about the zoning records tucked neatly in my office or the agricultural easement granted to my land back in the 80s. And she definitely didn't know that under county law, her beloved HOA held exactly zero power over my property. But I stayed quiet because timing is everything. And Karen, she was about to hand me all the ammo I needed. There wasn't a doubt in my mind. She'd eventually do something so spectacularly dumb, it couldn't be walked back. And when that moment came, I wouldn't just be the guy with goats and tomatoes. I'd be the one person who could shut down her little suburban fiefdom for good. She just didn't know it yet. That next week kicked off with a solid thud against my front gate, a delivery guy dropping off yet another official envelope from the HOA. It was sealed in one of those plastic sleeves, the kind that usually holds medical records or court papers. I opened it slowly, already knowing it was another gift from Karen. Sure enough, a brand new list of fabricated citations. This time she accused me of causing a public disturbance due to agricultural odors, claimed I was running an unlicensed food production site, and even wrote something about my goats being noise polluters at inappropriate hours. I couldn't help but laugh. My goats didn't even start bleeding until 7 a.m., and honestly, they were usually quieter than the landscaping crew she hired every Thursday to shave 2 inches off her already perfect lawn. But this wasn't about noise or smell. This was about control. Karen had decided I didn't fit into her curated suburban ideal, and she wasn't going to stop until something gave, and she didn't stop. Not even close. She started hosting these so-called community safety meetings in her backyard every Sunday evening. Neighbors showed up, mostly out of confusion, not knowing what they were signing up for. Karen had printed flyers with dramatic slogans like, "Protect our property values," and "Stop unauthorized land use." She even included photos of my chicken coop, marked up with red circles like it was part of some criminal investigation. At first, a few folks nodded politely, unsure of what to think. But as the weeks dragged on, I noticed the shift. More people leaving early, a few rolling their eyes, some not coming back at all. But Karen pressed on, marching like a general leading an army that never enlisted. Meanwhile, I was keeping records. I saved every bogus notice, took photos of all the flyers, installed motion-activated cameras along the perimeter of my land, just in case she got bold again. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation, and something told me I'd need it soon. Then one morning, just before dawn, I spotted a car parked down the street, engine off, lights out. Someone sat inside. I clipped on my sheriff's badge, walked up nice and easy, and tapped on the window. The guy inside? Dennis, junior member of the HOA board. He practically jumped out of his skin. When I asked what he was doing there, he stammered something about collecting data for community assessment. I told him next time he wanted to assess anything near my land, he should schedule it during daylight hours and make sure his clipboard didn't have chicken escape routes scribbled on it. Then came Karen's next move, and it was a big one. She filed an official HOA violation, complete with a $10,000 fine. The charge: illegal property development and endangerment of neighboring homes due to unregulated farm structures. The document was laughably vague, clearly fabricated, but it made its way to the county, and protocol being what it is, someone had to follow up. Enter Barry, zoning inspector, clipboard guy. He showed up the next morning, visibly annoyed that he had to waste his time on the circus. Barry and I went way back, high school buddies, now working civil enforcement. He gave me a look, glanced at the goats inside. We took a walk around the property. I handed him the zoning maps I dug up from the archive. Maps that showed something Karen had no idea about. Decades ago, my grandfather had partnered with the county to classify our land as an agricultural demonstration site. That came with legal perks. Special protections under local law. Not only was I allowed to have animals, coops, greenhouses, and roadside stands, I was legally permitted to host school tours, sell produce, even run small farming workshops without needing a single approval from the HOA. Barry looked at the documents and laughed. "Oh, she's gonna love this," he muttered. I nodded. She earned it. But Karen? She doubled down, started posting anonymously on neighborhood forums, accused me of hoarding hazardous chemicals, letting animals roam the streets at night, even claimed I was part of a black market egg ring. Yes, really. I only found out because Walter, one of the oldest residents in the neighborhood, dropped by holding a printed screenshot. He looked confused. "Is it true?" he asked. "Did you weaponize roosters?" I nearly spit out my coffee. We laughed for a good 5 minutes. Then he handed me a slice of lemon pie his wife baked and told me to keep doing what I was doing. And that's when it hit me. Karen might have been loud, persistent, but she wasn't exactly gaining followers. In fact, the more noise she made, the more support I started getting. Neighbors started leaving thank you notes at my gate. A couple folks mentioned how much they enjoyed seeing the chickens in the morning. One person even made a handmade sign that read, "Fresh eggs are not a crime." The neighbor woman, who'd been neutral until now, stopped by with a basket of produce and asked if I could assist her in creating a little garden of her own. Karen must have heard about this because the next morning, I woke up to find a splattered zucchini on my driveway, accompanied by a note that stated, "This isn't over." It was at this point that things were becoming cartoonish. That next Monday, I returned to the sheriff's office and softly opened up a new file, chronicling the harassment, the trespassing, the false reports, and the HOA's concerted attempts to intimidate a legal property owner. I wasn't filing charges just yet, but I wanted it all on record. The wheels were turning. Karen didn't know it, but she was setting the stage for her own downfall. Each false complaint, each falsehood, each slanderous rumor, all contributing to me constructing a case that didn't merely settle disputes, it taught lessons. By the end of the month, Karen made one final move. She petitioned for a community-wide referendum on an emergency motion that would authorize the HOA to find properties beyond their jurisdiction if they affected neighborhood quality. Totally ridiculous and not legally binding, but a vote was scheduled. She went all out. Flyers, door-to-door canvassing, scare tactics. She explained to neighbors that my goats would attract coyotes, my compost bins were ground zero for bacteria, that I was going to construct a pigsty next to the playground. What she did not understand was just how tired everyone was of her nonsense. On the night of the vote, there was only about 10 people present. 8 of them voted against her. The motion did not pass. Karen stormed out in mutinous silence, her binder wrapped in her arms as if it were a shield, eyes feral with frustration and incredulity. She didn't realize that she had just gone past the line of last resort, and now I had everything I needed to reply. Not in the form of goats, not in the form of words, but in the form of justice that someone in my circumstances was particularly well placed to mete out. This wasn't revenge, it was civic education, and school was going to start. It began innocently enough, a little roadside table under the branches of an oak, some crates, a score of eggs, fresh tomatoes, and jars of hand-labeled blackberry jam. I erected a tiny chalkboard sign that said, "Sheriff's Farm Resh." Nothing elaborate, just a little bit of neighborhood pizzazz, some local flavor. People driving by would slow up, smile, sometimes blow a friendly horn in support. Some neighbors lingered to talk, even purchased a few items. The atmosphere was relaxed, serene, the kind of tranquility country living is meant to provide. But simplicity and peace were two things Karen could not abide. The following morning, I emerged to see the stand still in place, but the chalkboard sign lying on the ground. Jam jars had been opened and tipped over, eggs smashed up in their cartons, as if someone had had a tantrum in the dead of night. One note had been jammed under the bricks securing one corner of the table. It said, "Stop illegal sales activity immediately, or further action will be taken." No signature, but the self-consciously dainty cursive was unmistakably Karen's. I tidied up the mess, replaced what I could, and reassembled the stand. I wasn't going to fold, not when I was well within my rights. By noon, there was a small crowd. A few neighborhood children stopped by with their parents and asked if they could see the chickens. I gave them a little tour and handed out a few eggs as presents. Smiles all around. Folks snapped pictures. The atmosphere was wholesome, pure, even. And then, cutting through the happy tranquility, came a recognizable shriek. Karen rushed down the street like a tornado in stilettos, phone already in record mode, lips curled in self-righteous anger. "This is an unauthorized commercial enterprise on private property," she growled, training her phone on the eggs like they were illegal substances. "You can't sell food to the public without inspection certificates and permits. You're putting the whole neighborhood at risk." I calmly told her, in front of a dozen witnesses, that the land was zoned for agricultural activity, and that yes, I had a current, county-issued food handler's permit. I even had a laminated copy in my truck. Karen appeared stunned for a second, but attempted to quickly regain, pulling her own laminated card, a reproduction of the HOA rulebook. She pointed at a paragraph regarding no commercial activity on HOA adjacent properties that impacts community aesthetic. I just smiled, moved aside, and pointed to the sheriff's badge on my belt. Her phone lowered as comprehension slowly set in. Parents in the crowd started whispering. Someone began recording. Karen attempted to turn, saying she had already called the police and made a formal complaint. "Perfect," I said. "Let's wait for them together." In 10 minutes, a patrol car arrived. A deputy got out, looked around, a bit bewildered at first, then smiled when he saw me. He approached, nodded respectfully, and asked what was happening. I allowed Karen to go first. She ranted on about health code infractions, zoning violation, psychological damage from goat droppings on the hiking trail. The deputy listened politely, expression inscrutable. He then turned to me and said, "You good, Sheriff?" I nodded, undefined. He turned to Karen again and said, "There's no crime here, ma'am." He's perfectly within his rights. Karen's jaw dropped. She looked from the deputy to me, frantically seeking some technicality, some loophole, but there wasn't one. A neighbor posted the video on the internet later that evening. It went viral in local community. Karen in mid-shriek, accusing me of operating some sort of black market egg cartel, while children laughed and stroked goats in the background. The title of the post was, "When HOA Drama Meets the Sheriff." The comments were brutal. Some called Karen drunk on power. Others referred to her as the goat whisperer of doom. A couple of people even cracked jokes that they'd swing by to purchase jam just to annoy her. The publicity humiliated her. And of course, it only encouraged her next action. 2 days later, the HOA board sent out a tactfully phrased community-wide email. It was there that they asserted that though community harmony was still a concern, there were some agricultural activities from an adjoining property that resulted in visual disturbance and agricultural encroachment. It was Karen's handiwork, but of course, they lacked the courage to mention me by name. So I did what any good county official would do. I sent a formal letter to the board, referencing again the agricultural easement, this time with photos of their deceptive flyers, the false citations, and written reports of Karen's trespassing. I CC'd the county clerk, zoning department, and sheriff's legal counsel. That got their attention. A couple of days later, Gloria, a board member, called me privately. She admitted she was tired of Karen's drama and apologized for the tension building. She even suggested I mediate a sit-down. I refused. This wasn't about me. This was about a course of harassment born of the delusion of unencumbered power. Karen wasn't going to relent because she didn't believe she could be restrained. She genuinely believed HOA power could trump law, that if she screamed loud enough, long enough, the truth would get drowned out. But from the beginning, she'd made one fatal error. She fought with someone who didn't just know the rules, but wrote them. A week went by without anything happening, and for an instant, I allowed myself to think the storm had passed. That fantasy was broken on a misty Tuesday morning when I got an official court summons. Karen had taken out a restraining order against me, claiming that I had tailed her in my patrol car, threatened her, and employed farm animals to scare her. The packet was thick, pages of fuzzy screenshots, anonymous claims, and even a printout of a rooster meme someone had tagged me in. I couldn't help but laugh, but the charge was serious enough that I had to appear and answer. I spent the next several days getting everything in order. Videos, dates, witness statements, my record of permits, and naturally Karen's relentless stream of fabricated infraction and bizarre rants online. By the time I appeared in the courtroom, I had 3 neatly arranged folders and a relaxed, unshakable feeling of calm assurance. Karen was already there, sitting next to a lawyer and surrounded by a rainbow of color-coded binders. She refused to look at me. Her hands were slightly shaking, but her lips were pursed in that smug little smile she wore when she felt she had the upper hand. The judge, an older woman with very little patience for nonsense, called on Karen to go first. What came next was an uncontrollable monologue, half drama, half delusion. She talked of fright, of anxiety caused by livestock, of threatening compost heaps and religious harm. It was like seeing a low-budget play. When my turn arrived, I did not make it complicated. I let the documents speak. I provided the judge with records, zoning maps, permits, a letter from the county, and a USB drive containing video of Karen trespassing over and over again on my property, each incursion recorded on camera. As I concluded, the judge paused. Then she turned to Karen and asked, "Do you have any lawful evidence to justify your assertions?" Karen stumbled, attempted to reverse course, muttered something indistinct about community wellness. The judge let out a deep breath. She decided against her. The restraining order was denied. Karen was fined for making a frivolous claim and court costs to pay. As I exited the courtroom, I didn't smile, didn't gloat, just tipped my hat to the judge and walked out with my head held high. By the time the decision was referred to in the following HOA newsletter, the community had already taken sides, and it wasn't Karen. The board, with no option remaining, made a brief and awkward statement regarding respecting legal decisions and avoiding personal conflicts. It was classic damage control. But the actual change didn't occur in ink. It occurred in whispers and posture, in the way individuals gradually began to cross the road when Karen was coming over, how chairs edged just that little bit closer to hers during the next town meeting. She still clung to her clipboard as if it carried some import, but its authority vanished. I spent one afternoon giving a tour of the farm to a group of local school children, something my grandfather did when I was a kid, and here I was, following in his footsteps, introducing little minds to how chickens are raised, how vegetables grow, how bees pollinate squash blooms. They asked wide-eyed questions, laughed at a sneezing goat in mid-lick, and departed carrying small cartons of fresh eggs. Their teacher gave thanks, and one of the parents said it was the first time her daughter had ever picked a tomato. It brought me back down to earth, made me remember exactly why I began all this in the first place, why I continued to labor on through all the absurdity. It was never about Karen, it was about community, genuine, tangible community, not some imitation version she was attempting to force on me from the other side of a clipboard. But Karen naturally could not leave well enough alone. Only a couple of days later, she reported me to the Department of Health for running an illegal petting zoo and exposing children to harm. I received a formal letter in the post, but this time, her attempt backfired almost immediately. The inspector who showed up, Ernesto, wasn't just thorough, he was warm. Born and raised in the county, he'd even done patrol ride-alongs with me as a teen. He walked the property, took detailed notes, asked a few procedural questions, and then bought a jar of jam to take home. He explained to me, smiling, that mine was among the neatest small farms he'd ever inspected. Told me he'd be putting my name forward for a county cover story on sustainable microfarming. When the HOA board found out about that, things started to really come apart for Karen. At the next board meeting, Jeff, a generally reserved member, rose to his feet and questioned whether perhaps they should have an official vote about whether Karen's incessant whining was in fact damaging the HOA's reputation. Karen went white. She attempted to protest, maintained she was alone in defending neighborhood values, but the room fell silent. No nods. No murmurs of assent. Her power did not simply collapse, it dissipated. The very next day, I got a hand-delivered letter from the HOA board. It graciously recognized that I was beyond their authority, apologized for the inconvenience caused by one of their members, and asked me to be a speaker at their next annual community event. I couldn't help but laugh reading it. After all the bogus fines, phony police calls, and trespassing charges, now I was the guest of honor? But I had other plans. I thanked them graciously, and instead proclaimed I'd be hosting an event of my own. The county's inaugural Harvest and Heroes Day here on my property, open to the community. No forms, no boards, no clipboards required. I personally delivered invitations to each residence in the area, each one with a smile. I even planted one in Karen's mailbox just for poetic spite. She responded just as I knew she would, with indignation. She scurried to host a rival event, the HOA Autumn Appreciation Picnic, but the timing was wrong and the messaging worse. Her flyers stated, "Don't be confused by off-propy diversions. Community values are important." The tone was ripe with desperation. When my posters went up at the diner, the coffee shop, the fire station, it was obvious what event folks were attracted to. The day of the event arrived with clean air and blue skies. Folks came in steady waves. Families with small children, retirees, teenagers seeking something cool. A local band even inquired about whether they could play near the hay bales. We had everything: pumpkin carving, goat petting, apple cider, and booths manned by local farmers and artists. The pièce de résistance of the day, a pie contest judged by the county commissioner himself and my former academy instructor. At about noon, as I assisted a group of children in feeding corn to the chickens, I spotted her, Karen, standing just off my property line. Arms crossed, sunglasses on, her lips pinched so shut that they seemed to have a possibility of vanishing altogether. She never set foot on the earth. She couldn't. The court order remained in effect, but she lingered there, observing. With each laugh, each hug, each thank you, her jaw seemed to clench just a bit more. And then the coup de grace. The county commissioner mounted the mic. He stated that as a result of the community benefit and legal definition demonstrated by this farm, the county was officially declaring the property to be an example of what other agricultural collaborations would look like in the future. He presented me with a framed certificate. The audience applauded and cheered. I caught sight just in time as Karen darted behind a bush, her figure disappearing as she turned and departed. Later that night, as the visitors filtered out and the heavens relaxed into gold, I sat on my back porch with a mug of cider, observing the goats getting into bed for the evening. The earth was calm, not quiet but serene. That kind of silence that descends after the up, the sort that arrives when all that is left to hear is wind through leaves, the call of a cricket, the unbroken beat of a life well lived. The actual victory wasn't in the diploma or even the courtroom. It wasn't so much in beating Karen or bringing the neighborhood against her. It was in seeing children find magic, in hearing people laugh and learn on this earth. It was in planting something tangible, in seeing it grow where their food came from, in neighbors talking to one another again instead of squabbling in Facebook threads. Karen had set out to tear something down, but instead, without meaning to, she built something stronger. She rallied the community, not around her clipboard, but around something real, something they could see, touch, taste. She brought people to my doorstep. She made them care. And now, finally, the noise had faded. The lawsuits were behind us. The goats were still here. So was I. The clipboard had lost its power, and the farm stood taller than ever. Justice, in its slow and steady way, had done what it always does. It restored balance. As October deepened, a rare quiet settled over the neighborhood. The air turned crisp and clean, laced with the scent of wood smoke and hay. Trees lit up in shades of copper and fire, and the goats grew their thick, shaggy coats. Mornings came with a rolling fog that blanketed the pasture like something from a fairy tale. And through it all, silence from Karen's side of the fence. No citations, no rants, no strange cars parked across the road snapping photos. Just the faint, hollow echo of her defeat, like distant thunder that had rolled past. But I knew Karen. She wasn't the kind to surrender. She wasn't done, just quiet. And sometimes quiet doesn't mean peace, it means planning. Then one morning I noticed something new. Surveyor flags lining the edge of the property between my field and her backyard. I recognized the color codes immediately. Orange for boundary disputes, yellow for utility. Someone was trying to stir the pot again. I took a drive to the county office. The clerk there, a woman I'd known for years, confirmed it. Karen had filed a challenge to the boundary line, claimed part of my fencing and animal enclosure spilled onto her land using an old zoning map from the 1970s, long since replaced. Legally, she had the right to request a review, but I wasn't worried. I pulled my own record. The updated survey from 1999, reaffirmed in 2010. Not only did it prove my boundary line down to the inch, it showed that the disputed strip was actually a county utility easement, not part of her property, not part of mine, just public right-of-way. I made a few quiet calls, and then I made a quiet purchase. The empty lot next to Karen's property had been sitting for years, unclaimed, unloved, owned by a man who'd moved out of state and had no plans to return. The sale closed in 2 weeks. Karen didn't even know, not until she saw the sign go up. I posted it myself. County Sheriff Community Garden and Rescue Co-op, a public project supporting rescued roosters, retired hens, and youth agricultural education. It was real. I meant every word of it, but it also served a very poetic function. Yes, I had chickens, but now I had roosters. Roosters who greeted the dawn with full-throated pride. Every morning, without fail. Just as the sun peeked over the hills, their calls rang out like bugles across the pasture. Karen cracked within 48 hours. I saw her one morning, storming out in a bathrobe, waving a broom at the fence line, yelling at the sky. She called animal control. They came. They left. She filed a noise complaint. The responding officer was one of my former deputies. He smiled, handed her a pamphlet about soundproof windows, and left. By the end of the week, she'd sent 6 increasingly frantic emails to the HOA board demanding an emergency session. No one replied. Meanwhile, my little project grew legs. Local high schoolers came by on weekends to help with the animal. We hosted composting workshops that drew in families from across the county, people who never knew my farm even existed. One woman brought her elderly father, a retired dairy farmer. He spent an afternoon sitting by the goat pen, smiling like he was 16 again. It wasn't about Karen anymore. It hadn't been for a while. This was about something rooted, something lasting, and I never gloated, never named her, never mocked her online. I didn't need to. Her isolation was enough. She walked alone now. The whispers trailed her like perfume. The neighbors who used to smile during her meetings now crossed the street when she passed. The board had stripped her of enforcement power, quietly, unanimously, citing excessive misuse of process. She still had her house, still had her clipboard, but now she didn't have an audience, just empty chairs and eyes that refused to meet hers. Then something strange happened. One cold morning, as I headed to the coop with a bucket of feed, I saw her, standing near the fence line, not yelling, not posturing, just standing there, arms crossed, eyes downcast. Still, I came up slowly. She glanced up. For the first time in months, her face didn't have that steel mask of arrogance. She looked tired, smaller somehow, older. She said nothing at first, and I didn't say anything either. Behind me, a rooster gave a proud, ringing crow. One of the goats gave a lazy bleat, as if it too was in no hurry. Eventually, Karen did speak. Her voice was low, hardly louder than the wind. I didn't think it would go like this, she said. I just wanted things to be the way they were. I nodded. Change is hard, I said, but it's part of living. She slowly looked around, like she was truly looking at the land for the first time. The chickens dust bathing at the shed, the children's artwork pinned up on the barn wall, the hand-painted signs, the laughter on the wind. This was never about code violations, was it? She asked. I didn't reply, just waited. She let out a weak laugh. I was president of the HOA board for 7 years. Everything tidy, perfect lawns, quiet streets, nothing amiss. I thought that was peace. She stopped. Then one day I woke up and realized, her voice broke just slightly. The neighborhood had become cold. Everyone behind hedges and gates. Everyone too afraid to be different. A pause. Perhaps I got too carried away, she whispered. I didn't forgive her. Not then. Some things take time. But I nodded slowly, and for the first time, we stood there without tension crackling in the air between us. She left a few moments later, more slowly than she'd come. I saw her for weeks afterward. Perhaps she was fatigued. Perhaps she'd finally seen the world was not hers to manipulate. That Christmas, we strung lights down by the barn, had a holiday party in the garden, served cider, scooped hot stew, allowed children to hang homemade ornaments on the coop. One of the volunteers inquired whether they could give one of the roosters a name from someone everyone in the neighborhood. I grinned. Okay, I replied. Call him whatever you want. They called him Karen. He crowed the loudest.